This is what a real Mrs. Whitmore looks like. Madison Vale said it softly, but the courtroom was quiet enough for every person to hear. Then she placed a silver key on the polished oak table, as if she were placing a crown in front of a fallen queen. The key caught the morning light from the tall courthouse windows, flashing once across Clara Whitmore's face. Clara did not blink. She sat on the opposite side of the aisle in a champagne-colored suit, her hands folded neatly over a small leather purse, her posture so still that even Daniel seemed annoyed by it. He had expected tears. He had expected trembling. Maybe even one final desperate plea from the woman he had divorced and dismissed. Instead, Clara looked at the key, then at Madison's smile, and said nothing at all. Daniel leaned back beside his new fiancée, his navy suit perfectly tailored, his gold watch resting at his wrist like proof that time had always belonged to him. Behind them, two reporters whispered near the double doors. A few relatives from the Whitmore side sat stiffly in the second row, pretending not to enjoy the spectacle. Everyone in that room knew why they were there. Whitmore Mansion, 12 acres outside Charleston, 3 stories of white columns, old brick paths, rose gardens, and family portraits, was being claimed after Eleanor Whitmore's death. To Daniel, it was inheritance. To Madison, it was victory. To Clara, it was the house where she had learned how quietly a woman could disappear while still keeping everything alive. Madison turned the key with one manicured finger. "Daniel and I are ready to restore the estate to its proper image," she said, glancing toward Clara, as if proper meant without her. Some people were only temporary. A small laugh moved through the back of the room, thin and polite, the kind people make when cruelty is dressed in pearls. Daniel smiled then, slow and satisfied. It was the same smile Clara remembered from the day he told her she had come into his family with nothing and should not leave pretending she had built it. The same smile he wore when she walked out of the mansion in the rain with one suitcase, no settlement worth mentioning, and Eleanor's old pocket watch hidden in her coat pocket like a secret heartbeat. Now that same watch rested in Clara's palm. Her thumb moved once over its worn silver edge. No one noticed. They were too busy watching Madison enjoy the performance. Judge Margaret Holloway entered, and the room rose. Her black robe moved like a shadow across the bench. Papers shifted. Chairs creaked. Daniel whispered something to Madison, and she smiled wider, already imagining the mansion doors opening for her, the marble foyer echoing under her heels, the Whitmore name bending around her like it had been waiting. But Clara knew something Madison did not. That silver key could open the front door. It could open the garden gate. It could even open the wine cellar beneath the east wing. But it could not open the locked drawer in Eleanor Whitmore's old writing desk. It could not open the truth buried inside a preservation trust. And it could not open the one room in that house that had never belonged to Daniel at all. Long before Madison touched that silver key, Clara had known the sound of every door inside Whitmore Mansion. She knew which hinge complained in the winter, which hallway carried voices from the library, and which window in Eleanor Whitmore's bedroom needed to be pushed with both hands before it would close against a coastal storm. The mansion sat 12 miles outside Charleston, wrapped in oak trees, Spanish moss, and the kind of silence wealthy families mistake for dignity. From the outside, it looked untouchable. White columns, black shutters, a driveway long enough to make guests feel important before they even reached the porch. But inside, Clara had seen the truth. The roof leaked above the east stairwell. The rose garden had gone wild. The kitchen staff had not been paid on time twice in one summer because Daniel forgot that old houses did not survive on family names alone. He loved the mansion when it was full of guests, music, and crystal glasses under chandeliers. He loved standing in the foyer with one hand in his pocket, telling people his great-grandfather had brought the marble in from Italy. But when the last car left and the lights dimmed, Daniel disappeared too. Downtown meetings, golf weekends, and private dinners Clara was not invited to. Clara stayed. She stayed when Eleanor's hands trembled too badly to lift a teacup. She stayed when the winter heat failed and the old woman insisted she was not cold, though her fingers had turned pale against the quilt. Clara called the repairmen, balanced the household accounts, learned which nurse Eleanor trusted, and sat beside her on the balcony while the magnolias bloomed. Some nights, Eleanor would look across the lawn and whisper, "This house remembers who keeps it warm." Clara would smile because she thought it was only kindness, The kind an aging mother-in-law gives to the woman her son no longer notices. She never asked for ownership. She asked Daniel to come home for dinner. She asked him to visit his mother before her appointments. She asked him not to let Madison sit at Eleanor's table while Eleanor was still alive and pretending not to understand. Daniel answered with sighs, delayed calls, and that polished irritation rich men use when they want obedience to look like patience. By the final year of the marriage, Clara had become a ghost in rooms she had restored with her own hands. At parties, Daniel introduced Madison as a consultant, then as a friend, then stopped explaining her at all. Clara would stand near the staircase, holding a tray of untouched champagne flutes, listening to strangers praise Madison's taste in flowers while the arrangements had been ordered by Clara before sunrise. The first time Madison walked through the front hall in cream heels, she looked around and said, "This place needs a younger woman's touch." Daniel laughed. Eleanor did not. She only reached for Clara's hand beneath the table, her grip thin but certain. 2 weeks before Eleanor died, she called Clara into the old writing room, the one with blue wallpaper faded by decades of afternoon sun. On the desk lay a pocket watch, silver, scratched, and heavier than it looked. "Take this," Eleanor said. Clara tried to refuse, but the older woman closed her fingers around it. "Daniel knows the price of this house," she whispered. "You know its soul." Clara had not understood then. Not fully. She only carried the watch home against her heart, unaware that inside its quiet ticking was the first clue to the name no one in that courtroom expected to hear. The day Daniel asked Clara to leave, the rain came down so softly it sounded almost polite. It tapped against the tall windows of Whitmore Mansion while he stood in the marble foyer with one hand in his pocket and Madison waiting near the library door, pretending to study a portrait she had no right to recognize. Clara had just returned from the pharmacy with Eleanor's last prescription still in her purse, though Eleanor had been gone for 9 days. The house still smelled faintly of lilies from the memorial service. White ribbons still hung on the gate, but Daniel had already changed the locks on the east wing and called a realtor from Atlanta to discuss private buyers. He did not look grief-stricken. He looked inconvenienced. On the center table, beside a crystal bowl Clara had polished every Friday for 6 years, lay the divorce papers. Daniel tapped them once with 2 fingers. "It is better if we handle this cleanly," he said. Cleanly, as if a marriage could be folded like a napkin and removed before guests arrived. Clara looked at the papers, then at the staircase where Eleanor used to pause every morning, one frail hand on the banister, waiting for Clara to bring tea with 1 spoon of honey. Madison shifted behind him, her perfume drifting through the foyer, bright and expensive and completely wrong for that house. "Daniel needs peace," Madison said, her voice smooth as glass. "And this family needs to move forward." Clara wanted to ask which family she meant. She wanted to ask where Madison had been when the roof leaked over Eleanor's bedroom, when the power failed during a summer storm, when the old woman cried because her son had missed another doctor's appointment. But Clara had learned that some rooms do not deserve your truth. She walked to the table, picked up the pen, and read every page while Daniel watched with growing impatience. The settlement was small, almost insulting. No claim to the estate. No acknowledgement of the years she had kept it running. No mention of the invoices paid. From her private savings when Daniel forgot payroll again. Only clean language, clean signatures, clean erasure. When Clara reached the final page, Daniel gave her that smile, polished and cold. "You came into this family with nothing," he said. "Do not leave pretending you built it." The words did not break her. They settled somewhere deep, like stones dropped into still water. Clara signed her name slowly. Clara Evelyn Whitmore. The pen made a quiet scratch against the paper. Madison looked relieved, as if ink could turn history into dust. Daniel reached for the documents, but Clara held them for 1 more second, long enough for him to notice that her hand was not shaking. Then she set the pen down. She removed her wedding ring, placed it beside the crystal bowl, and walked upstairs to pack. She took no silver, no gowns, no framed photographs from the parties where she had smiled beside a man already looking past her. She took a brown leather suitcase, 2 books Eleanor had given her, a cardigan from the back of the chair in the writing room, and the pocket watch. The mansion seemed to listen as she came down the stairs. The old wood gave one familiar creak beneath her heel. At the front door, Daniel did not offer an umbrella. Madison did not hide her smile. Clara stepped onto the porch and into the rain, the driveway stretching ahead for nearly half a mile, lined with oaks that had watched generations of Whitmores mistake possession for love. Behind her, the front door closed. Not slammed, just closed, with the quiet finality of a house holding its breath. Clara did not look back. She only pressed Eleanor's pocket watch against her palm and walked toward the gate, unaware that the woman who had been buried 9 days earlier had already made sure Clara's name could not be erased. For the first 3 weeks after Clara left Whitmore Mansion, silence followed her everywhere. It sat beside her on the bus into downtown Charleston. It waited in the tiny apartment above an old bakery on King Street, where the ceiling sloped low over the bed and the window frame rattled whenever the wind came off the harbor. It filled the space where Daniel's footsteps used to be, where Eleanor's bell used to ring, where the mansion's long hallways had once carried her name from room to room. But this silence was different. It did not ask her to shrink. It gave her room to breathe. The apartment was less than 600 square feet, with chipped cabinets, one narrow closet, and a kitchen floor that tilted slightly toward the sink. The first night, Clara slept under a borrowed quilt with her suitcase still unopened beside the bed. Rain streaked the window glass. Downstairs, the bakery ovens started before dawn, and the smell of warm bread rose through the floorboards at 5 in the morning. Clara woke to it with swollen eyes and an unfamiliar thought. No one was waiting to be disappointed in her. No one was measuring her worth against a family portrait. No one was calling her temporary. She got up, made coffee in a dented pot, and placed Eleanor's pocket watch on the windowsill where the first light could touch it. Then she opened her suitcase and began again. She found work wherever dignity would fit. At first, she helped a local antiques dealer clean inventory in a warehouse 10 miles outside the city. The building smelled of dust, lemon oil, old wood, and cardboard. Clara spent her mornings wiping down forgotten chairs, sorting brass drawer pulls, and learning how to tell walnut from mahogany by grain and weight. Her hands grew rough. A thin line of paint stayed beneath one fingernail, no matter how hard she scrubbed. But every time she restored a broken hinge or brought shine back to a scratched table, something inside her answered. She understood old things. She understood what it meant to be dismissed because someone had stopped seeing your value. By winter, she was taking small repair jobs on her own. A rocking chair from a retired teacher in Mount Pleasant. A cedar chest from a widow in Somerville. A dining table from a young couple who could not afford something new but wanted something with history. Clara carried tools in the trunk of a used gray sedan with more miles than pride, drove across town in flat shoes, and listened to soft jazz on the radio because silence no longer frightened her. She created handwritten invoices at her kitchen table, paid rent on time, bought groceries with coupons, and learned the strange luxury of answering only to herself. Some evenings, exhaustion pressed between her shoulders so deeply she could barely lift a cup of tea. But even then, there was peace in it. Her tiredness belonged to her. Her progress belonged to her. One Saturday morning, while sanding the arm of a carved oak chair, Clara looked down and realized she had gone an entire day without wondering what Daniel was doing. The realization came gently, like sunlight moving across the floor. She did not celebrate. She simply smiled, brushed sawdust from her sleeve, and kept working. By spring, a small sign hung in the window below her apartment. Clara Whitmore Restoration. Not Daniel's name. Not the mansion's name. Hers. People began to come not because she had once belonged to a wealthy family, but because her hands knew how to make damaged things useful again. And every night, before closing the shop, Clara wound Eleanor's pocket watch and listened to its steady ticking, unaware that the past she had survived was preparing to find her again. The first time Ethan Caldwell walked into Clara Whitmore Restoration, he did not arrive like the kind of man people whispered about in business magazines. There was no entourage, no loud phone call, no polished announcement of wealth. He came in on a Thursday afternoon carrying one end of a carved oak chair while his driver struggled with the other, both of them careful not to scrape the doorway Clara had repainted herself the week before. The chair was old, heavy, and badly neglected, with one cracked leg and faded upholstery the color of dried leaves. Clara looked up from her workbench, a strip of sandpaper still in her hand, and saw a tall man in a charcoal coat standing under the small brass bell above the door. His shoes were expensive, but there was sawdust on one sleeve where he had helped lift the chair himself. That was the first thing she noticed. Not the watch, not the car waiting outside. The sawdust. "I was told you restore things people have given up on," he said. His voice was calm, low, and without the easy arrogance Clara had learned to recognize in men who were used to being obeyed. She wiped her hands on a cloth and walked around the chair slowly. The frame was late 19th century, hand-carved, probably from a southern hotel lobby or private club, once beautiful enough to make guests sit straighter. Someone had stored it in damp air for years. Someone had mistaken damage for worthlessness. Clara touched the cracked leg, then the worn curve of the armrest. "It has not been given up on," she said. "It has been waiting for someone patient." Ethan looked at her then, not at the shop, not at the dust, not at the modest sign in the window. At her. "That is why I brought it here." She later learned the chair came from the lobby of the Caldwell House Hotel, an old property near Savannah that Ethan was restoring into a boutique retreat. He had inherited hotels, land, and office towers, but he spoke about buildings as if they were living things with memories trapped in the walls. That made Clara listen. Most wealthy men she had known collected property to prove they could. Ethan seemed to study it, protect it, and ask what it needed to become useful again. He returned 2 weeks later to check on the chair and found Clara alone after closing, polishing the repaired wood beneath a warm desk lamp while rain blurred the front window. The chair had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. Its beauty had simply been allowed to breathe again. Ethan ran one hand over the restored armrest and smiled, not with possession, but recognition. "You understand hospitality better than my entire design team," he said. Clara almost laughed. "I fix furniture." "No," he replied. "You understand what makes people feel they have not been forgotten." The words landed gently, but they stayed. A month later, he offered her a consulting contract for Caldwell House. Not charity, not rescue. A contract, printed, clear, and fairly paid. Clara read every line before signing. Ethan waited without rushing her. He did not call her brave. He did not ask about Daniel. He did not treat her past like a wound he had permission to touch. He simply gave her a seat at the table and expected her to belong there. Slowly, Clara entered rooms. She once would have entered as someone wife, someone decoration, someone afterthought. Now she arrived with fabric samples, restoration plans, budgets, and opinions people wrote down. Her name appeared on invoices, proposals, and meeting agendas. Clara Whitmore. Not erased, not borrowed. Her own. And each night, when she came home to the apartment above the bakery, she placed Eleanor's pocket watch beside the contracts Ethan had helped make possible, unaware that one small mechanism inside it was waiting to reveal the document that would bring her back to Whitmore Mansion. The pocket watch stopped on a Tuesday night, 3 minutes after 11, while rain tapped gently against the window above Clara's kitchen sink. She had just returned from Savannah after a long day at Caldwell House, her shoes dusty from walking through unfinished guest rooms and her notebook filled with measurements, fabric samples, and restoration notes. The apartment above the bakery was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of tires moving through wet streets below. Clara placed Ethan's signed contract on the table, set her keys beside it, and reached for the watch the way she did every night. For months, winding it had become a small ceremony, a way of ending the day with Eleanor's memory instead of Daniel's voice. But that night, the crown resisted. The hands trembled, then froze. Clara held it closer to the lamp, her thumb moving over the scratched silver case. It was an old piece, delicate but stubborn, and she had repaired enough antiques to know when something was not broken from age, but waiting to be opened correctly. At first, she thought only of the mechanism. She brought out her smallest tools, laid a white cloth across the kitchen table, and removed the back plate with the care of someone touching a sleeping thing. A thin coil of metal caught the light. Then, beneath it, tucked into a space no larger than a quarter, she saw the edge of folded paper. Clara stopped breathing for one quiet second. The paper was yellowed, pressed flat by years of silence, and when she eased it free with tweezers, she found 3 lines written in Eleanor's narrow handwriting. Whitmore House Preservation Trust. Hollis and Keene Attorneys. File number 7-1-4, C. Clara read it once. Then again. The rain kept falling. Somewhere below, the bakery ovens clicked on for the morning shift, even though dawn was still hours away. She sat at the table until the coffee in her mug went cold, the paper resting beside the open watch like a secret that had finally grown tired of hiding. The next morning, Clara called Hollis and Keene from the back room of her shop. Her voice was calm, but her fingers pressed wide around the phone. The receptionist went silent after hearing the file number. Then she transferred the call to an older attorney named Samuel Keene, whose voice changed the moment Clara said her full name. He did not ask why she had called. He only said, very softly, "Mrs. Whitmore, I have been waiting for you." By noon, Clara was sitting in a downtown office with tall shelves of leather-bound records and a view of the courthouse dome. Samuel Keene was in his 70s, with silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the careful posture of a man who had carried other people's secrets for too long. He placed a folder in front of her, but kept his hand on it for one moment before letting go. "Eleanor created this trust 6 months before she passed," he said. "She believed Daniel intended to sell the house as soon as he could. She also believed you were the only person who understood what the house was meant to be." Clara looked down at the first page. Her name appeared in black ink, formal and undeniable. Clara Evelyn Whitmore, sole controlling beneficiary. The words did not feel like victory. Not yet. They felt like a door opening in a hallway she thought had been sealed forever. Samuel explained that Eleanor had placed the mansion into a preservation trust before the divorce was finalized, protecting it from sale, transfer, or private redevelopment without Clara's approval. Daniel could inherit the family pride, the portraits, the stories he polished for dinner guests. But he could not sell the house. He could not give it to Madison. He could not erase Clara from the one place where Eleanor had seen her most clearly. When Clara finally left the office, she stood on the sidewalk beneath a pale Charleston sky, the folder held against her chest. Across the street, the courthouse columns rose white and still. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ethan asking if everything was all right. Clara looked at the pocket watch in her palm, now open, quiet, and honest. Then she typed back, "I need to prepare for court." By the time Clara returned to the courthouse, Madison had already turned the front steps into a stage. She stood beneath the white columns in a fitted ivory dress, her blonde hair pinned neatly above pearl earrings, one hand resting on Daniel's arm, and the other holding the silver key for every camera to see. 2 local reporters had come because Daniel had called them himself, pretending the hearing was a routine estate matter, but making sure everyone understood there would be a story worth printing. Madison smiled as if the mansion had already opened its doors to her. She spoke about restoration, legacy, and bringing new life to an old family property, though Clara knew she meant private events, luxury weddings, and a buyer waiting with a check large enough to turn history into profit. Daniel stood beside her in a dark blue suit, looking every inch the heir he had always performed for the world. He nodded at the right moments, adjusted his cuff links, and smiled whenever Madison said the words family estate, as if saying them loudly enough could make them true. Clara arrived 10 minutes later in a black sedan Ethan had sent, though she stepped out alone. Her champagne suit was simple, her shoes low, her hair pinned at the nape of her neck. She wore no diamonds, no family brooch, no symbol of wealth except the quiet steadiness in the way she carried the leather folder from Samuel Keene. Ethan stepped out behind her, not close enough to claim her, only close enough to stand with her. Daniel noticed him immediately. For the first time that morning, his expression shifted. It was small, almost invisible, but Clara saw it. The brief tightening around his mouth, the question in his eyes. Ethan Caldwell was not the kind of man Daniel could ignore. His name was attached to hotels, towers, and half a dozen preservation projects across the Southeast. Daniel had once tried to meet him at a charity dinner and failed to get past an assistant. Now Ethan was holding the courthouse door open for Clara, as if there were nothing more natural in the world. Madison noticed too, and her smile sharpened. "How charming," she said as Clara passed. "You brought support." Clara looked at her for only a second. "I brought documents." Inside, the courtroom smelled of polished wood, paper, and old air conditioning. The same relatives filled the same benches. The same reporters took their places near the back. But this time, Clara did not sit like a woman invited to witness her own erasure. She sat at Samuel Keene's table, placed the folder carefully before him, and rested Eleanor's pocket watch beside it. Daniel's attorney opened with confidence, speaking about bloodline, inheritance, and Daniel's right to manage the Whitmore property without interference from a former spouse. Madison sat straight-backed, the silver key now lying in front of her like a trophy. Every so often, she touched it with one finger, making sure Clara could see. Daniel leaned toward Clara during a pause, his voice low enough for only her side of the aisle to hear. This could have been easier if you had stayed realistic. Clara did not turn her head. Her eyes remained on Judge Holloway, who was reviewing the docket with quiet patience. Realistic, she said softly, is exactly why I came. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Samuel Keene opened the leather folder. Ethan sat behind Clara, silent, his hands folded, offering no rescue and taking no space from her. Then Judge Holloway looked over her glasses and asked for the final ownership documents. Daniel smiled again, but this time Clara heard something fragile inside it, like glass touched too hard. Madison lifted her chin. Samuel rose slowly, holding Eleanor's trust papers in both hands, and the room seemed to draw one long breath. Samuel Keene did not hurry. He crossed the narrow space between Clara's table and the bench with the steadiness of a man who knew paper could be louder than any accusation. Daniel's attorney gave a small, impatient sigh, the kind meant to suggest that whatever Samuel held was sentimental, outdated, and legally harmless. Madison saw it and smiled again. She leaned closer to Daniel, her shoulder brushing his sleeve, the silver key still gleaming on the table in front of her. Clara kept her hands folded. Only her thumb moved once over the closed face of Eleanor's pocket watch. Judge Holloway accepted the folder, opened the first page, and the room shifted into a silence so complete that Clara could hear the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights above them. The judge read for several seconds without speaking. Her expression did not change, but her eyes moved more slowly now, line by line, signature by signature, seal by seal. Daniel's smile held at first. He had built his entire life on the assumption that the Whitmore name would always rise beneath him like marble steps. Madison's smile held too, because she had mistaken confidence for truth. Then Judge Holloway looked over her glasses. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "were you aware that your mother established the Whitmore House Preservation Trust 6 months before her passing?" Daniel blinked once. "My attorney will review whatever document this is," he said, still smooth, still certain. "The estate has always belonged to the Whitmore family." Judge Holloway looked back down. "That is not what this document states." The air changed. One of the reporters stopped writing. A cousin in the second row lowered her eyes. Madison's hand moved away from the key as if it had suddenly become cold. Daniel leaned forward. "Your Honor, with respect, my former wife signed away her claim during the divorce." Judge Holloway turned a page. She signed away any marital claim presented in the divorce settlement. She did not sign away a separate beneficiary interest created by Eleanor Whitmore before that settlement was executed. The words landed quietly, but they struck every face in the room. Clara did not look at Daniel. She looked at the judge, at the black robe, at the document Eleanor had hidden behind time itself. Samuel stood beside the bench, hands clasped, his face calm but sad, as if he wished Eleanor had lived to hear this. Spoken aloud. Daniel's attorney rose quickly, but Judge Holloway lifted one hand and continued. "The trust prohibits private sale, transfer, redevelopment, or commercial event conversion of Whitmore Mansion without approval from the sole controlling beneficiary." Madison's lips parted. For the first time all morning, she looked not elegant, not triumphant, but uncertain. Daniel turned toward her, then back to the judge, his polished mask beginning to tighten at the edges. "And who?" Madison asked before Daniel could stop her, her voice thinner than before. "Is the beneficiary?" Judge Holloway looked down at the final page. The room seemed to lean toward her. Even the silver key lay still, useless beneath the courthouse light. Clara felt the old ache in her chest, not from fear, but from the sudden nearness of Eleanor's hand closing around hers in the blue writing room. Then the judge read the name clearly, without drama, without pity, without hesitation. Clara Evelyn Whitmore. Daniel's smile vanished so completely it looked as if someone had drawn a curtain across his face. Madison stared at him, waiting for an explanation he did not have. Samuel returned to Clara's table and placed a certified copy before her. Ethan remained seated behind her, silent as promised. Clara lowered her eyes to the page. There it was, in black ink, formal and undeniable. Not a gift meant to make her rich. Not a weapon meant to punish Daniel. A truth protected until the world was quiet enough to hear it. Judge Holloway gave one final ruling. Any attempted sale agreement Daniel had arranged was void, and any future petition involving the mansion would require Clara's written consent. The reporters began writing again, faster this time. Madison's hand slipped from Daniel's arm. Clara finally turned toward him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the calm of a woman watching a locked door open from the inside. Clara left the courtroom with the certified trust papers held against her chest and Eleanor's pocket watch warm in her palm. Behind her, cameras clicked softly, but the sound no longer felt like judgment. It felt distant, like rain against windows in a house she had already survived. Daniel followed her into the hallway before Madison could catch his sleeve. His voice, once so practiced and smooth, came out uneven. Clara, wait. We should talk about this as a family. She stopped beneath the courthouse skylight, where afternoon sun fell across the marble floor in pale squares. For a moment, she saw him as he had been years ago, standing at the far end of the Whitmore foyer, handsome, certain, impossible to reach. Then she saw him as he was now, a man who had mistaken inheritance for character and silence for surrender. You stopped being family, Clara said, the day you mistook loyalty for weakness. Daniel looked at the folder in her arms, then toward Ethan, who stood several steps back, giving Clara the full space of her own victory. Madison appeared behind Daniel, pale beneath her careful makeup, the silver key hanging loosely from her fingers. It no longer looked like a crown. It looked like a piece of metal that had promised her more than it could ever open. Clara did not take it from her. She did not need to. The next morning, she drove 12 miles outside Charleston alone. The road to Whitmore Mansion curved beneath live oaks heavy with Spanish moss, past the white fence she once repainted in summer heat, past the rose beds she once cut back by hand after Daniel said the gardener could handle it and forgot to hire one. At the gate, the old caretaker, Mr. Ellis, was waiting. He had worked for Eleanor for 30 years, and when Clara stepped out of the car, his eyes filled with quiet relief. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, not because of marriage, but because the house had always known her that way. Clara gave him the court order and the preservation trust documents. Then she looked at the front doors, tall and dark beneath the balcony, the same doors that had closed behind her in the rain. This time, they opened inward. The air inside was stale, carrying the faint scent of covered furniture, old wood, and rooms left waiting too long. Dust floated through beams of morning light. Family portraits stared from the walls, but Clara did not lower her eyes to them anymore. She walked through the foyer, past the marble table, where her wedding ring had once rested, past the staircase that still creaked on the 4th step, and into Eleanor's blue writing room. The locked drawer was opened by Samuel Keene that afternoon. Inside were letters, restoration notes, and a final instruction written in Eleanor's careful hand. Let the house shelter women who need a beginning. Clara read the sentence twice. Then she sat in the chair by the window and let the silence become something new. Not emptiness, not grief, purpose. Months later, the first rooms of Whitmore House opened not for weddings, not for investors, not for Madison's polished parties, but for women rebuilding their lives after divorce, loss, and years of being told they were temporary. The rose garden bloomed again. The kitchen lights stayed warm past sunset. Laughter returned to the halls in small, careful steps. Ethan visited often, but he always knocked first, and he never crossed the threshold until Clara opened the door. One evening, as golden lights spread across the porch, Daniel's name appeared on her phone. Clara watched it ring until the screen went dark. Then she wound Eleanor's pocket watch, placed it on the windowsill, and opened every curtain in the house. She did not take his mansion. She restored the home he never deserved.